All right, so who's up for a good story? Because let's be honest, everyone's heard of Dracula, right? Fangs, capes, that whole bit.
Oh, yeah, for sure, classic.
But the real story behind Vlad the Third, the historical figure who inspired it all, is so much wilder than any movie.
It's true. You get these myths and legends, but often there's a grain of truth that gets blown way out of proportion.
Exactly. So today we're doing a deep dive into the real Vlad the Impaler. We're talking primary sources, chronicles, letters, even some pretty wild stories passed down through generations.
Trying to separate the fact from the fiction.
Which is always the fun part.
It is. And to really understand this guy, we've got to understand his world, right?
Mm-hmm.
15th century Wallachia, constant power struggles, shifting alliances.
Oh, and don't forget the Ottoman Empire, always looming in the background.
A constant threat. Exactly.
Okay, so before we get too far, let's talk about the name Dracula. I mean, obviously today it screams vampire, but back then, totally different meaning.
Yeah, it's actually pretty straightforward. It starts with Vlad's dad, Vlad II, who got the nickname Draco. He was part of this chivalric order, the Order of the Dragon, formed to fight, you guessed it, the Ottomans.
Makes sense. But Draco just meant dragon at the time, right?
Exactly. Straight up dragon. No demonic connections. Yet.
Okay, so how'd we get from dragon to Dracula to, well, fangs?
Well, Dracula is basically just son of Draco, like a family name. Think Johnson, son of John, that kind of thing. But here's the twist. In Romanian, Dracul also means the devil.
Wait, seriously?
Yep, two meanings. So you can see how over time, with Vlad III's, let's say, unique way of dealing with enemies.
It's a bit of an understatement.
Just a tad. Anyway, the name took on a whole other level of meaning.
I bet it did. Okay, so before we get into all that, rewind with me back to Vlad III's childhood. What was his deal?
Well, picture this. You're a young prince, right? Born somewhere between 1428 and 1431, and suddenly your life takes a turn.
Oh, this doesn't sound good.
Yeah, not exactly a fairy tale. He's sent off as a hostage to the Ottoman court.
A hostage? Seriously? He's just a kid.
Welcome to medieval politics. Basically, Vlad and his brother Radu, they're bargaining chips. Their dad, Vlad II, is trying to play this delicate game with the Ottomans, stay on their good side, keep his own power.
Talk about pressure. Can you imagine being a kid in that environment? The Ottoman court, no less.
Must have been intense. I mean, you're surrounded by luxury, sure, but also the constant threat of violence, betrayals, the way power actually works.
I'd imagine it'd make you either incredibly cautious or utterly fearless.
Maybe both. It's hard to say what exactly went on in his head, but those early experiences definitely shaped who he became. We see hints of that duality later on.
Makes sense. So knowing all that, it's no wonder that when he gets his first taste of power, things get, well, eventful.
Understatement of the century.
Right. He takes the throne in 1448. Right.
Yeah.
Briefly, at least. What happens?
Short reign, a lot of chaos, ends with him fleeing back to, you guessed it, the Ottomans for safety. But even in that short time, you see his mind working. There's this letter he writes, basically says, when you're strong, you make the rules. When you're weak, well, everyone walks all over you.
Cynical, but also kind of true, especially back then.
Right. He'd learned the hard way that trust is a fragile thing, especially in that world.
I feel like that's the understatement of this whole deep dive. And I'm guessing things weren't much better even within his own family, right?
Oh, absolutely not. In fact, Vlad's father, Vlad II, he seems to have had a bad feeling about the whole situation. Even after making peace with the Ottomans, thought his sons might be in danger.
And was he right?
Sadly, yeah. Vlad II and his eldest son, they're murdered. Most likely by who else? Political rivals.
Brutal.
Totally. And that leaves young Vlad III and his brother Radu basically alone in the lion's den of the Ottoman court. No protection, just trying to survive. Talk about a crash course in not getting murdered by your enemies.
Wow. Sets the stage for, well, everything that comes next. I mean, talk about a trial by fire, right?
Yeah.
No wonder he comes back to Wallachia in 1456 ready to rumble.
Oh yeah, he was done messing around.
For sure. So he reclaims his throne, and almost immediately things get bloody, like really bloody.
Yep, this is where we really start to see Vlad the Impaler emerge, and not just as a name.
Right, because it's not an exaggeration to say his reign was marked by, well, mass executions.
To put it mildly, hundreds, even thousands, killed during this period.
Which I have to imagine sent a pretty clear message to anyone thinking of challenging his authority.
Oh, absolutely. There was a very clear message. Don't even think about it.
So how much of this was just, him being ruthless and how much was calculated?
That's the thing about Vlad. You can never fully separate the two, right?
Yeah.
But a lot of it was strategic. He was targeting his enemies, rivals, anyone who'd betrayed his family in the past.
So it wasn't just random violence, he had a plan.
Always. And if you look at the records from this time, there's this fascinating thing with this princely council. The turnover is insane. Like
Yeah.
every couple years, practically all new names. He was systematically removing anyone he saw as a threat and replacing them with, let's say, people who knew what was good for them.
Creating a climate of fear, for sure, but also, I imagine, a certain amount of reluctant loyalty.
You got it. It was brutal, no doubt. But in that world, that time, it was effective. He held on to power for 6 years during this second reign.
Which, knowing Wallachia, was no small feat.
Not at all, though those 6 years were eventful, to say the least.
Because it wasn't just internal struggles he was dealing with, right? There's also the whole thing with the Saxons.
Ah, yes, the Saxons. They were those German-speaking communities living in Transylvania, and let's just say they did not get along with Vlad.
The chronicles from that time period, they don't hold back, do they?
Not even a little. They paint him as a monster, pure and simple.
Full of stories about his cruelty, which, knowing Vlad, there's probably some truth to.
Oh, I'm sure some of it happened. But we also got to remember the Saxons had their own agenda. They supported Vlad's rivals, so there's definitely some, shall we say, creative storytelling going on.
Propaganda, basically.
Exactly. But that said, some of the details they give are so specific, so out there, it makes you wonder.
Like what? Give me the good stuff.
All right, so one story that always stuck with me is this one about Vlad and a copper cauldron.
Okay. This sounds ominous.
So apparently he had this cauldron, right? Huge thing, filled it with boiling oil or maybe water. Accounts differ.
I am not liking where this is going.
Yeah, it wasn't pretty. Let's just say, not Vlad's most humane method of dealing with his enemies.
I believe it. Though I guess compared to impalement, it's slightly less gruesome.
You're really trying to find a silver lining here, aren't you?
Yeah, gotta stay positive when you're neck deep in medieval history, right? But, okay, even with all that said, Vlad's conflicts with the Saxons were nothing compared to his big showdown with the Ottoman Empire.
Now we're getting to the good stuff.
Because this is where Vlad the Impaler really earns his name.
Right, it's 1462, Mehmed II, the Ottoman Sultan. He demands tribute from Wallachia.
Standard operating procedure for empires back then, right?
Pretty much. But Vlad, being Vlad, he refuses.
And not just a polite, no thank you, I'm busy.
Oh no, this was a statement. When Mehmed sends these envoys to collect, Vlad, he has them captured.
Oh boy.
And get this, he has them impaled, supposedly because they refused to remove their turbans in his presence.
Okay, that's our Vlad. Always making a point. But again, I have to imagine there was some strategy involved, right? This wasn't just him being extra.
Oh, there's always a method to his madness.
Yeah.
See, Vlad knew Mehmed wouldn't take this lying down, so he decides to take the initiative, launches this daring raid into Ottoman territory, leaves a path of destruction in his wake.
And this is where we get to the infamous Forest of the Impaled, right? The stuff of legends.
The one and only. After the raid, Vlad leaves behind this scene that would, well, it certainly made an impression. Thousands of Ottoman prisoners, along with anyone suspected of collaborating with them, all impaled on these stakes.
I mean, talk about psychological warfare, right? That's a visual you don't forget.
Exactly. The Ottomans, they had this superstitious fear of Vlad already, saw him as almost demonically ruthless, and this just played into that.
So he was playing the long game.
Oh, absolutely. This was about more than just revenge. It was about sending a message. You don't mess with Wallachia, and you definitely don't mess with Vlad the Impaler.
So Vlad pulls off the ultimate escape room, right? Gets out of prison, presumably well-rested, and jumps right back into the chaos of, well, being Vlad.
You say well-rested, but let's not forget we're talking over a decade in prison. It's 1475 when he finally gets free, and things in Wallachia, they hadn't exactly calmed down in his absence.
Right, because by this point, it's basically a revolving door of rulers, everyone and their cousin trying to grab a piece of the pie. So who was in charge when Vlad made his grand return?
A fellow by the name of Basarab Blayota claimed the throne through some distant family connection. The usual political maneuvering.
Can't imagine Vlad was thrilled about some random dude warming his throne.
I'd pay good money to have seen his face. But here's where things get really interesting. How Vlad gets sprung from prison.
Okay, because it wasn't a daring escape, right? We're talking about Stephen III of Moldavia, former rival, some might even say enemy.
A one and only. Seems even Stephen recognized that when it came to the Ottomans, Vlad was an asset.
The enemy of my enemy is my impaler. That should be on a t-shirt. But wait, it gets better, doesn't it? Because then he teams up with King Matthias, the same Matthias who'd locked him up in the first place.
You've got a knack for remembering the messy bits, don't you? Talk about awkward reunions. Though I guess when you've got a common enemy like the Ottomans, even old grudges get set aside.
Real politic at its finest. So, what was the plan? Where'd they send Vlad the Impaler to make his presence known?
Bosnia. 1476, they launch a campaign against the Ottomans there, and, well, let's just say Vlad hadn't gone soft in prison.
Impalement was back on the menu.
Oh, it was a full-blown comeback tour. Chronicles don't skimp on the details. Mass impalements, towns put to the sword, the whole bit.
Oh.
Vlad was sending a message.
Something along the lines of, remember me, because I'm back, and you really should have sent a strongly worded letter instead.
Basically. Though strategy-wise, it was brilliant. Imagine being an Ottoman soldier hearing those words, Vlad's back. Talk about a morale killer.
I mean, fear is a powerful weapon, but even more than that, Vlad knew how to use it.
Absolutely. This wasn't just about being scary. It was about demoralizing the enemy, disrupting supply lines, the whole 9 yards. And it worked. They pushed back the Ottomans, and Vlad's reputation, well, let's just say it got a boost.
Talk about a comeback story. But we both know all roads lead back to Wallachia, right? So did he finally reclaim his throne for good?
He did, for a tragically short time. With Hungary and Moldavia backing him up, he finally drives out Basarab-Leota in 1476. For a glorious few weeks, he's back where he believed he belonged, ruling Wallachia.
I can just imagine the mixed emotions. Relief, terror, the whole be careful what you wish for thing. But knowing Vlad's luck, it couldn't last, could it?
Nope. Basarab-Leota, he wasn't done yet. Gathers up Ottoman reinforcements, and in December 1476, they face off near Bucharest.
Okay, so this is it. Final showdown. Lay it on me. How does it end for Vlad the Impaler?
In true Vlad fashion, his death is shrouded in mystery. Multiple versions, each more dramatic than the last. One story says his own men betrayed him, assassinated right in the thick of battle.
Never a dull moment with Vlad. What else?
Another version claims he died fighting, last stand against overwhelming odds, a warrior king to the end.
Fitting, in a way.
Right. And then there's my personal favorite. He was mistaken for an Ottoman soldier and killed by his own troops.
Oh, wow. Killed by friendly firewall disguised as the enemy. Talk about irony.
Right. You couldn't script it better. And just to add one final question mark, we're not even sure where he's buried. Some say an unmarked grave at the Snagov Monastery. Others claim different locations.
Of course. Leave it to Vlad to keep us guessing, even centuries later.
Exactly. But I think that's why his story still fascinates us. He was a man of extremes, brutal, yes, but also a brilliant strategist, a fierce defender of his homeland. He was a product of his time, for sure, but also someone who refused to play by the rules.
A true original. Well said. And on that note, we'll wrap up our deep dive into the life and times of Vlad the Impaler. Hopefully you've learned a thing or two, maybe even feel inspired to do some digging of your own. The primary sources are out there just waiting to be explored.
They are. They'll maybe leave the impaling to the 15th century.
Yeah, agreed. Until next time, everyone, happy learning.